Hi, I'm Ted Price, founder and CEO of Insomniac Games.
Creatively, what was it like jumping into virtual reality for the first time?
It was an adventure for us jumping into VR, and part of that is we have been developing third-person action games for a long time. But when we began experimenting with cameras and control in VR, we had to rethink how we were designing.
When it comes to Edge of Nowhere, can you talk about where this idea came from?
Well, our creative director, Brian Allgeier, is a big Lovecraftian fan. And we were inspired by one of Lovecraft's works in particular and wanted to make something that had that sense of isolation and mystery and was set in an environment that promoted heights and interesting things to look at. And so it's in Antarctica with this sort of surreal horror vibe.
Are you guys talking at all about the story or what's going on in this world?
Briefly, yeah, you are looking for a missing expedition. And as you venture deeper and deeper into the Antarctic, you begin to discover things that are twisted, that are surreal and not what you expected. And that's where the Lovecraftian horror vibe begins to come in.
What's it like in terms of controls within a VR landscape, and what were some of the challenges in that space, especially since as you play the game, you're climbing, you're going down ropes, you're doing all different types of things?
The first challenge we ran into was how much should we, the designers, control the camera versus the player. And we learned very quickly that as soon as you take camera control away from the player, it can be uncomfortable. So we began to experiment with where the camera should be, how close to the character, and especially when, if ever, we should move the camera versus letting the player move it with his or her head.
You guys also, at least in the demo here, have the contrast from the outdoor snowy environments to the pitch black indoor environments. What kind of challenges is that in virtual reality where you're kind of trying to guide players where to look in a way?
Well, we tend to use lighting to help players discover the next step in their journey. And when we are going from interiors to exteriors and vice versa, we usually have to create some visual guidelines or guideposts for people to help them navigate. So going into a pitch black cave, it is a little disorienting, and we give you a few seconds to be disoriented until you light the torch, and all of a sudden you're facing something very different than what you were facing outside.
A lot of people are talking about visuals when it comes to virtual reality, but can you talk about 360-degree audio and how you guys implement that to also steer a player and also add to the ambiance?
3D audio is incredibly important for VR, and especially in an action adventure where there are things happening around you all the time. So we use 3D audio cues frequently in Edge of Nowhere to give the player hints about what's coming at him from the side, maybe stalactites about to fall from above, maybe there's a giant monster that's traveling over the player's view cone. And finally, there is this whole immersive ambiance that we can use to make you really feel like you're there, not just visually but orally.
As a developer, what was it like having a Xbox controller that you can actually focus on, knowing that's what people are going to be using?
Having an Xbox controller is great because most of us are very comfortable with it, and we as developers are very familiar with using it for the game's controls. So I thought it was a very good choice by Oculus.
And creatively, just looking ahead, what do you feel Oculus Touch will open up to developers as they explore different ways of controls in VR?
I think it's going to open up interaction. I mean, having played one of the demos here at E3, it was mind-blowing. Being able to hand things to your friends or toss things to your friends is an experience that you really can't experience in a more traditional game. But the way that the capacitive touch has been implemented is also really innovative, and I think it's going to open up a lot of design opportunities for folks like us.
You've been making games for a long time. Is there any comparison to this leap into VR from anything else historically in gaming?
There have been a few massive leaps in our industry when it comes to technology. I think mobile was one of them. But VR and I'd say augmented reality as well, they are both disruptive, and I think they're going to really change the way we design games in general for this audience that is passionate about VR. But I think it's going to open up things even in a broader sense, and maybe even blur the lines between what are games, and what is something else, a different experience.
As we look into the future and AR and VR become more accepted, more mainstream, is there ever going back to the traditional 2D screen?
I don't think we've stepped away from the 2D screen at all. I mean, I still play tons of games on my big TV and on my small phone, and I don't think that's ever going to change. I think what VR is doing is expanding what's available to players and giving us as players just more options for the kinds of worlds we will journey to and how we experience them.